Hey guys, DIY Vanessa here. Today we are in my kitchen and we are going to tackle my backsplash project. I'm super excited to do this because I've literally been wanting to do this for 3 years now. So the tile that we're using today is a larger than normal white subway tile, clean and classy. I'm gonna do a white grout and I'm gonna stagger it in that traditional subway pattern. And I'll just walk you through step by step my entire process and hopefully give you guys the confidence to do your own project one day.
So here's a quick look at my kitchen before I removed the decorations. And then another quick look once I've cleared everything off the counters.
So I'm quickly gonna go over all the supplies that you need to get started. It's really pretty simple. So let's start with the scoring tool. So the scoring tool, I got this on Amazon for about 25 bucks. And this essentially creates a fine line in your tile. And then when you apply pressure, it's gonna break it in a straight line. Now we will be needing the wet saw for some of the more complicated cuts where we need to go around outlets and edges, but this is gonna get us through a good bulk of it. It's also not messy and really easy to use. We also have our spacers. Our spacers are going to create gaps so that we can fill in with grout later, and it's gonna make sure we have nice even spacing between all of our tiles. This is our edging piece. So this has a rounded, what's called a bull nose edge, so that when the tile is at the end of the project, either it's on the top or the side, you have a really nice transition into your drywall. So it's not just a sharp, harsh edge. So I have a small amount of these. We also, of course, have our tile for the main project. We also have our notch trowel. So the notch trowel is going to be used to apply the adhesive material. I'll show you how to use this in a little bit. I got this at the hardware store for like $4 or $5. Also, a pack of these is quite inexpensive. I've been able to recycle these for my past 6 or 7 tile projects. So it's actually quite cost effective to just invest in a pretty large quantity bag of these spacers. I want to say it was $3 for this size, this amount. And then lastly, we have our thin set or our Acryl-Pro. So Acryl-Pro is just a brand. I'm not loyal to any one particular tile adhesive. I've also used type 1 before, but this will range anywhere from $11 to $15. And it is the pre-mixed material. So it's just less mess and much easier to use. And this is what we're gonna use to adhere the tiles to the wall. So that's it. It's a really pretty simple shopping list to get started. So let's do this.
Here's another quick look at our supplies. Before getting started, be sure to remove all the outlet covers from your project area. Now it's time to jump into tiling. Using your notch trowel, scoop out a small amount of the tile adhesive and apply a thin, even amount to the backside of your tile. Then use the notched edge, which is the jagged edge, and do an even scrape across the back of the tile. And when you push the tile against the wall, the ridges that you just created will create a suction effect against the drywall to help it adhere. Then keep repeating this step in the desired pattern with your tile. I'm starting my pattern in the middle of my stove, so that is the focal point of my design. And then I'm continuing off in the right and the left direction. All right, now it's time to bust out the wet saw. So I got my wet saw for about $100 on Amazon. It's a very basic wet saw, so I'll show you how to use it. Now you take off the top compartment and then, gotta remove these extra tools that I had stored in here. So this is where you find the water compartment. This tank will hold the water that is used to cycle up onto the blade and keep it from sparking and creating too much heat and friction. So you fill it up about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. There is a overflow spill line if you put too much water in it. You'll want to keep an eye on this compartment. If the water starts to get low, just keep adding a little bit back. And you'll know when it's low because your blade will literally start sparking and starting to smell hot. So you just put the lid back on and then you are ready to start your cuts. So make sure it's plugged in. This is the on switch, and then you literally just grab your tile and push it through that spinning blade. You can adjust that left piece to guide your tile so it's a really nice straight cut like I'm doing doing here. For each piece, you simply measure and draw lines on the back of the tile and then use the saw to make your cuts so it fits your area. So now I'm just continuing my tile pattern from right to left until I reach an obstacle, which would be a corner, an outlet cover, or a wall. A great tip is to always have a damp rag on hand. If that tile adhesive hardens or dries on the surface of the tile, it's really tough to get off later. So after I apply a tile, it's really nice to just wipe up the edges, anything that's spilled out off to the side, and keep your workspace really clean. All right, I'm going to show you how to use a scoring tool. So I have measured this piece of tile against the wall, and I need for it to be cut right here where I made this black mark. So there's a V notch right here on the inside of the scoring tool. You want to line it up against that edge, and then grab the handle, and there's a tiny blade on the underside of this tool. So when you drag it across, you hear that scratching noise? That is creating a fine line and a deep scratch in the tile. So I like to go over it twice to make sure it's really deep, and then you apply pressure on the handle very lightly, and then you hear a snap, and what it's doing is it's cutting it on the line. Now it's not exactly perfect, but when you use your grout, it's gonna go ahead and kind of buff out that line so you can't see that it's not exactly precise. But that is how you use the scoring tool. All right, so when we get to situations like this, we still wanna keep an entire tile in its entirety so that the pattern is, there's continuity in the pattern. So what we did here was I drew a line and I measured out exactly where I need my cut to be. So I'm going to show you a little trick of how to deal with this situation, because the tile saw really only does straight cuts. So I actually called my big brother on this, and he gave me a fun little tip because I don't own a Dremel tool. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a series of straight line cuts that go down into the tile like this. And that is essentially going to chip away at this area. And if I need to saw this off using the spinning blade, that will create a nice edge. And luckily, when it's up here, this is the edge that's gonna be exposed that I'm working on. It's going to be covered by the plate switch. So I don't need a perfect edge. I just need it to fit the area. Quick tip for you guys, keep your notch trowel in a bucket of water when you're not using it. I tend to take a lot of elongated breaks. So this prevents the adhesive from hardening so it doesn't ruin your trowel. And then when you're ready to use it again, you just wipe it off and then you're good to go. When I get to edges like this, instead of measuring, sometimes it's easier to line it up against the wall and then draw a line with my marker and make my cut. And then you apply the adhesive, scrape it with the notch side, use the spacers on the bottom and the right-hand side, and apply the tile and then apply pressure. Moving on to the left side of my kitchen, I'm starting with the bullnose edge pieces on the far left and then continuing on with my standard pattern as I move to the right. Along the right and left side of my window, I had a series of tiles to cut that were the exact same size. So I tackled all of those cuts at once and then applied them to the wall. When the tile is complete, let it dry overnight. All right, before you get started on your next step, you want to take out all of your spacers. They should come out fairly easy. And then once you do that, you are ready to grout. Okay, now that we're ready to grout, we're gonna do a quick overview of the supplies you'll need to grout. First, you need a bucket of water so you can rinse out your sponge in between applications. You're gonna need an empty bucket for mixing your grout in. You're gonna need a grout float. So a grout float is what you use to apply the grout into all the grout lines, and it has this like smooth surface. We also have our sponge. You can get this pretty much at any hardware store. And then we have our grout. Today I am using a white non-sanded grout. So non-sanded just means that it's going to be a little bit smoother, not have that gritty texture. In my opinion, it's just so much easier to work with. That's pretty much all you need. All right, first you want to mix your grout. So add a little bit of grout and a little bit of water and stir. And then keep adding grout and water until you have the consistency of a really thick toothpaste. I prefer my grout to be a little bit thicker because then it doesn't go on as sloppy. And then keep mixing until you have enough quantity to do your entire project. All right, using the grout float, you want to scoop out a small quantity of grout and then carefully push it into all the crevices. Once you've applied it to a small area, take the side of the grout float and scrape it along the edge to pick up any loose material that's sitting on top. And then I like to recycle that same material and keep pushing it in to more empty grout space. Once you've grouted about 8 to 10 square feet of material, you then grab the sponge, wring it out, and wipe down the top surface of your tile, picking up that excess material and continually rinsing it out. Now, if your sponge is too damp, it will remove the grout from the crevices. So make sure that it's wrung out really well before you start wiping down the tile surface. All right, I'm gonna give you a close-up look at grouting. So we have our grout here. It's kind of like a thick toothpaste consistency. And what you're gonna do is use your float, scoop out a small amount, and then you're going to push it into the crevices and just wipe it along like that. Don't worry if it gets a little bit messy. And you just want to keep pushing it in to all the spots, all the gaps. And then when you've covered a small area, it's really your comfort level. You don't want to do too much because it'll dry out. But once you've got a nice area covered that you're comfortable with, try to avoid the outlets. Kind of just do a scraping motion to get it off for the majority. And then you want to take your damp sponge, make sure you wring it out really nice. I've got that over here to the side, sorry about that. And just keep wiping. And you're wiping the surface of the tile, which is the excess material that's kind of sitting on top. And you don't want it too wet because then the grout will actually wipe out of the place that you want it in between the crevices. But yeah, just keep wiping and applying grout until it's a nice, even layer within all of your grout lines, and just keep repeating that process until it's the way that you want it. You don't want the grout too thin, but you also don't want it like bubbling out of the crevice. So yeah, that's the essential breakdown. A few quick grouting tips for you guys. One is to constantly be changing out your water. When you rinse out your sponge, you're releasing all of the excess grout material into that bucket, and it tends to get really muddy and dirty. So constantly be changing that out. Also, if you notice, I have a spatula type tool in my hand. This comes in handy for smaller areas where that massive grout float can't get into, things like around the outlet covers or in the corners where the tiles meet. And the last thing to do is let it dry for 3 to 4 hours.